Okay, so sorry about that. Okay, so where were we? We were discussing about the beauty of the romantic period, right? Okay, so we will kind of rush through what we have discussed earlier. So this is like kind of an intellectual orientation, Reverend, right? What do you mean by an orientation? Very good. Kind of a direction, right? It is like a direction towards all these, a different revival of everything again, right? In a way, it was a revival, a rebirth of all these beautiful stuff, because during the Middle Age, right, it was kind of very darker. But after that, there was the Renaissance. But what happened after Renaissance was again this Industrial Revolution happened, right? So with that, everything was being, you know it was like the machinery was there, right? People were being urbanized, right? So with all these things, there was this necessity of something new, something fresh, right? Going back to nature, going back to humanity. So it was like that, right? Okay. And also you may remember the time period late 18th to the mid 19th century, right? That is the time period. So here in the definition slide you get that. And this is not only about literature, but as we are learning literature, we are going to focus only on literature, mainly poetry, drama and fiction, right? Yeah. And also this is very important. This Wordsworth's preface to lyrical ballads, right? So there's this definition, the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. It is like the manifesto of romantic poetry, right? Manifesto means it's like, the written documentation, right? Something like that. A written declaration. It is like the definition, the most important definition. When something is spontaneous, right? It's not forced to, right? Yeah. You're not forced to have those emotions. And yes, so then if we refer to the historical context, I'm referring to only the main points. Yeah. So if we refer to the decade, it is like 1790s. And the most pioneer figures were like Wordsworth and Coleridge. So if you cannot remember the entire name, right, you don't have to rack your brains to remember the entire name. Just the last name is enough. Yeah, Wordsworth and Coleridge. And also there was this idea of cultural nationalism, reverence, right? So even in our countries, all these Asian countries, you have this idea of nationalism, right? Kind of giving value to these nationalist ideas. But here it was like, it was not about a political movement, but what we have here is mostly something political, right? Nationalist political parties are there, right? But it is not like that. It is like kind of a cultural movement. And here you can see how the imitation of native folklore happened. And folklore includes all these folk stories, right? Folk tales, folk ballads and folk poetry, right? I'm pretty sure that even in your countries you have all these folk poetry, folk tales, folk stories, right? Yeah, like that. And also it was not only about these folklore, but also about medieval and Renaissance works, right? So medieval works were often, even we identified them when we were studying language, right? Can you remember, as kind of a darker period, right? And those works as darker works. But during this period, all these Gothic elements, they were kind of identifying them also to be beautiful. They were seeing beauty in everything, each and everything. So that happens even with life, right? When you kind of look at the life in a positive and a beautiful manner, everything turns out to be beautiful. And when you perceive everything in a negative manner, what happened, right? So they kind of turn into kind of darker moments, right? And yes, so the most important people in this movement, right? So it says that it had reached its zenith. What do you mean by zenith? It's like, the high point, the highest point, right? Kind of a high point. And by here, zenith means the highest, the most pivotal point. Let's say peak. Yeah. So with Keats, Byron, and Shelley, right? So I was telling this story to Reverend Nandasiri last day. I don't know whether you listened to the recording, Reverend. I don't think you had enough time, right? Okay, so Keats and Shelley were like bosom friends. They were like literally mango friends, right? They were kind of discussing every day, meeting every day, right? So there was this beautiful friendship between them. And then Shelley always used to have a copy of Keats' books with him. Always, right? When wherever he traveled, right? Wherever he was, he always had a copy. So he drowned, right? That's how he died at the age of I can't remember, it's like 27 or 28, very young, right? He drowned in a river, and his face was disfigured, right? When the body was kind of, taken out, and he was like, both Keats and Shelley, they were like very handsome people, but the body was disfigured, and even the face. So they could not identify the body. And how do you think they identified the body of Shelley? Yes, by the book of Keats, right? So he always had this copy, and by that book, they identified this is the body of Shelley. So it was like that. So there was this beautiful friendship and the relationship between them as well, right? So no competition at all. It was like that. Even Keats died very young, in his 20s. He got tuberculosis, TB. So the reason is, that the medicine is not very developed during that time, right? Yeah, so there were no much treatments, no much methods to kind of get recovered. So he died. So it's very sad, because if they lived, right, how much more poetry would we have, right, if they wrote that much, right, during that period when they were very young. So it's like that. Okay. So they were like the most pivotal figures, Keats, Shelley, and also Lord Byron. And what does this fact say about that period, Reverend? The fact that Lord Byron wrote. When you say Lord Byron, what do you think is his social class? Yes, yes, aristocracy, kind of high class, right? Belonging to that class. But even they wrote, right? And Keats, essentially, they were not like, it was not the kind of the uppermost class, right? So, likewise, any person could write, even Lord Byron, right, and the other people, commoners, and people who belong to the kind of a, it's not actually the middle class, because it was not that class distinction that was there during this period. So this middle class and all these things, they kind of, there is this revival after this time, after the Victorian period. After Romantic period comes Victorian period, right? So during that time, Dickens wrote, right? Charles Dickens, in Oliver Twist and all these books, you get this very big class distinction. But during this time, there was this, the upper class was there, but also the lower class was working. There was this working condition always, right? People were working in factories and all these things, because I was talking about industrial revolution, right? Because of that, all these factories were there, right? And yeah, so the fact that Lord Byron wrote, right, it shows that even the upper class, who were kind of idle up to this time, right, they were just idle, they were doing nothing, right, they were going hunting and all, right, but now they were writing, right, not all the people, but Lord Byron kind of represents that class, yes. And also during this romantic period, there was this supernatural element, right? So supernatural means, right? It is beyond our understanding, referring to ghosts and all these mystical powers, right? And Mary Shelley wrote this book, Frankenstein, that is a novel. So who do you think Mary Shelley is? Going by the name? Can you make the connection? I told you that there were these all beautiful relationships between them, these writers. Can you draw the connection between P.B. Shelley and Mary Shelley? His wife, yes, exactly. So there's this very bizarre story that when Shelley died, because he was so young, so she literally took out his heart from his body and then she preserved it. And until she died, right, she had this heart, the preserved heart with her. Because they were, belonging to the romantic period. So they considered that to be kind of, romantic. So it was like that. There were all these kind of nice relationships, kind of additional information. Okay. So are there any questions up to that point, Reverend? Okay. And also creativity was not identified as something proper. So the urbanization was there and technology and science were accelerating, right? That means speeding up. And also the places were crowded, right? And the village life was kind of disregarded, right? Downgraded, looked down upon. So it was during this period all these romantic poets and romantic writers emerged. So during a time where nature, life and beauty were not given enough identification, they were writing about nature, emotion and also, about the spiritual existence. So it is not like this spirituality in Buddhism, right? Not something deep like that. But they kind of identified with all these mystic powers, right? Mysteries, mystic powers, and also the beauty about soul. When we study Keatsian poetry, we can see all of these. Yeah. And we will kind of rush through the characteristics as well, reference. Yeah. So one of the most important characteristics was emotion over reason, right? Yeah. So, and also it is not just any other emotion but intense emotions, powerful emotions, right? Even all these minute emotions were given very much power, right? Yeah, so the emotions were identified as powerful. And it was like, as a source of aesthetic experience, right? Related to artistic. And also, again, we call this sublime. Sublime, we have this word in the next slide. Then we will discuss that. Sublime means beauty again. And also, as I told you, celebration of feelings, right? So feelings are celebrated. And not only love, that we can understand that the fact that love is celebrated, right? But the fact that terror is celebrated, right? Fear is celebrated. We try to kind of, run away from fear. But they were celebrating it. So when we look at a poem like Tiger, we can see. Have you read Tiger, Reverend, by Blake? No, that's totally fine. Yeah. I understand that you are after not a long vacation, right? Kind of a short vacation. Yeah. So that's fine. And then melancholy, what do you mean by melancholy? We have discussed this before. Melancholy. Very good. Kind of. Yeah, it's like sadness, Reverend. And not just sadness, extreme sadness. Melancholy refers to extreme sadness. So can you see that even they celebrated extreme sadness, right? It was also identified as something beautiful. And also that means wonder, marvel, right? So they were kind of, marveling about everything, right? So everything was identified as wonderful. And also they were not paying attention to these formal rules, right? And traditional procedures, structures. And that most of these traditional structures were imposed by the church. But we need to remember that during Renaissance, already these structures are falling apart, right? The church was not very powerful during this time, but we cannot say that church was not there. The power of church was not there. It was there, but not very rigid. But again, what was left was also kind of disregarded. right? All those kind of structures, again, they were broken. Yes. And now you know, right? And in some countries like New Zealand, churches are used as car parks, right? Because people don't go to churches anymore. It is, in a way, you can say it is, negative in a way, right? Because that is their religion. And in a way, on the other hand, some people are kind of turning towards spirituality, right? So they are realizing that there's nothing much in Christianity, I would say, right? And they are turning to more spiritual religions like, let's say, Buddhism or Hinduism, right? Such things are happening. And also kind of there is this Islamic kind of overflow as well, right? Yeah, people are not much kind of questioning, but they are embracing that. So such things are happening. Yeah. And yes, and also here this part is very important, that inner struggles, dreams and passions were given importance, right? All these sentimental factors. You know that even today sometimes we think that talking about our inner demons, right, inner struggles, is not that proper, I would say. But here you can see, right, it is not like that. As in, people had the kind of the liberty to talk about all these inner struggles, let's say anxiety, depression, right? So it is very sad to see that in this modern society how people identify even depression as a kind of a sickness or an illness. Yeah, it is not, right? So it is kind of a normal mental condition. I mean, it's not normal, but again, a mental condition which is very general, right? Which should be kind of generally addressed. But these days, you can say, right, people are talking about all this. Their inner struggles were conveyed through literature. When you look at Wuthering Heights, right, you get this. Have you read Wuthering Heights, Reverence? No, that's fine. Okay, that's totally okay. Anyway, I think you will, you will be able to read it. I think you have Wuthering Heights. Did you get this syllabus? No, okay. So then maybe I will give you this one to get a photocopy, or I will just ask the office to do that. Yeah. Okay. So women because of their higher class, right? And then men because of their wealth, right? So that was the reason for marriage, not love. But now all these ideas are changing. In Wuthering Heights, what you see is kind of like mad love, right? It's not kind of based on money, on wealth or class, right? Just love. So there were kind of, all these ideas. But again, when you read Victorian literature, you can see how again that tradition is shifting, right? Again to class and wealth. When you read the novels by Austen, you get that. Yes. And yeah, and art, music and literature, all they were created to resonate emotionally with audiences. So audiences could also cater to these emotions, right? Yeah. And then we will move to the next characteristic, imagination and creativity. So just like emotions were given value over reason, imagination, right, and thinking power, they were celebrated. So they were identified as paramount qualities. You know what is meant by paramount, right? It is like the most important, right? Yeah. And yes, also fantastic and supernatural elements were featured, right? So fantasy was given importance. Could you find the slide, Reverend? Imagination and creativity. I think the next page. Right. Yeah, so imagination and creativity as paramount qualities. So the power of imagination, thinking power was given importance. And also this fantasy, that is important, because up to now, there was this very much realistic experience, right? Because after modern period, I know that there was this Renaissance, true, but again after that, there was this period of enlightenment which valued reason, right, and science. But what happened here? fantasy is given importance, right? So fantasy was considered something crazy or absurd during the earlier period, during the Enlightenment. But here it is changing. And also supernatural elements, that science even now do not believe about all these supernatural elements, right? Scientists, do they believe about all this? No, right? So Enlightenment period is kind of all about science and reason, but here they were talking about supernatural elements. And also aesthetic beauty is emphasized, right? And then we have individualism, right? So if you have studied Renaissance, you know that there was this idea of humanism. Human is given importance, right, because of this immense power of church, right? It was like a response to that. But now it is about individualism again, right? Focus on the self. And this happened primarily because of this, that the loss of personal freedom due to urbanization. People were working, right? Like AIDS.
Free will.
Yeah, kind of free will is given importance, and also kind of the individual experience, Reverend, right? Because there was this loss of individuality, because all the people were living kind of like a same life, right? The lifestyle was very similar. They were working in factories, right? So no individuality was there, right? Even to talk about free will, Reverend, there was no individuality, right? People are not considered as human beings primarily. So then individualism came into being. And also identity and emotions, right? As you very correctly said, free will and also emotions were given importance. Yes. And also we discussed how they rejected conformity, that means conforming to these rigid structures, right? And also celebrated personal freedom and also subjective experience. What do you mean by subjective, Reverend? Subjective and objective? Yeah, kind of personal, Reverend, right? Yeah, personal experience. That dog wants to learn English literature. Yeah, and then personification was there. So personification was like one of the most important literary devices. What does that say about this individualism? Personification of everything. Yeah, so it is like, convey all these abstract ideas, right? Yeah, so that means personification was given, even natural elements were personified. So you can see to what extent this individualism went, right? Yeah, even natural elements are personified. So individuality of everything was given importance. Yeah. So yeah, and human personality, its moods and mental potentialities means, it's like these untapped abilities, right? The abilities that you do not know that exist within you, right? Maybe you are a good public speaker, you do not know that yet, right? Your potential, maybe you are a good writer, but you don't know, you don't have kind of identified it yet, something like that. Untapped abilities. So untapped is a word that you can use in your written stuff as well. Untapped. It's just like tapping, right? Tapping and then untapped abilities. Not discovered. Right. And yes. Okay, and after that we have another characteristic, the purity of childhood. I think we have to start from there, Reverend Nandasri, right? We discussed up to that point. Yeah, the purity of childhood. Imagination, we discussed that. Ah, right, okay, but no worries, we will just go through this. Okay, and why do you think this purity of childhood was given this much of importance? Why do we give importance to something specially when that is present or absent? Usually. So they say that people appreciate love when it is not there, right? Something like that, right? So usually it's like, these wealthy people dream of being simple. All these celebrities, they want to be simple, right? But then, all these people who wish to be kind of, rich and all these things, right? They want this extravagant lifestyle. That contrast, right? It's like, that grass is always greener on the other side. There's this quotation like that. So we think that what we have is not enough, right? So the most beautiful thing is out of our reach, something like that. So likewise, why do you think the purity of childhood was given this much importance? There was this discussion, Reverend. Yes? Why do we kind of value something? Because we have it or we don't have it. Yeah, kind of when we don't have it, right? We kind of mostly value something when we don't have it, right? I think now you value your mother country more, right? Your families, right? Your culture. So it's something like that. So the purity of childhood was given that much of value because the children, right, they did not have that much of a good childhood because child labor was there, right? So then they were used as mostly chimney sweepers. And the saddest part is they are not identified as sweepers, even chimney sweeps, right? So you can see how much objectified they are, right? Just they were used as brooms, literally, children, because they were small, they could go up chimneys, right? Something adults could not. So that was a very risky job, right? Which kind of, ought not to have happened, but that happened, right? So here I have mentioned it. Many children were forced to work in factories or as chimney sweeps, right? And it was like dangerous and also grueling. Grueling means, Reverend Sir, tiring, right? Yeah, very hectic, very tiring. And also that was for extremely low wages. And sometimes even a wage was not given, right? It's almost like slavery. The slavery was not there, but again, in very indirect, subtle ways, it was slavery, right? Yeah, and also this is like child abuse, right? Using kids as chimney sweeps. Yeah. So, because of this, romantic poets believed that children should be allowed to have this pure and happy childhood, right? Yeah. So that happens. So you can see that how as in when we consider the intentions, how good these romantic poets were, right? So they wanted a social change via their poetry or via their literature. It was not only about being popular, right? So these days you can see that writers want to be so popular, right? They're not thinking much about the message that they are going to convey. But this time you can see, right? So they were kind of trying to have this social change as well via their literature. Yes. So they portrayed a different kind of childhood filled with joy and play instead of labor, because children know to play, right? Not to kind of, work as laborers. So you can see all these things when we study Blake's Songs of Innocence, right? So he has these kind of different categories of poetry, right? Two major categories. One, songs of innocence, the other is songs of experience. So in Songs of Innocence, you get all these beautiful poems about babies, right? About children, right? Them being kind of very free, right? Playing and all. You don't have to write all those things because we will be discussing, right? So that's it. And then we have nature and the sublime. So sublime means like, the extreme beauty, right? Yeah, kind of an excellence. Yes. So they identified nature as a source of beauty, not only beauty, but also truth, right? Even in Buddhism, we have this reliance on nature, right? Yeah. And also inspiration, spiritual and sublime. Again, this extreme kind of beauty. They were tapping into spirituality. As I told you, it is not in kind of a very deep sense as in Buddhism, but again, spirituality. And also they were kind of fascinated with the sublime, right? In love with the concept of beauty. So Keats once writes that a thing of beauty is a joy forever. Likewise, they even wrote about beauty, right? Just beauty. They said that beauty is everywhere in the world, right? Can be sea, can be nature, everything. Yes. And yeah, so they were discussing about simultaneously the beauty and terror of nature's vastness, the immenseness, the largeness, and also power. So when we compare Blake's two poems, we will discuss those, Lamb and Tiger, right? So Lamb discusses about this beauty and innocence. Tiger discusses about this terrific part, right? Yeah, the power of nature. And also nature was personified, right? Yeah, we discussed that how personification was given importance, right? Yeah. And also seen as a refuge from industrialization and urbanization, because they were the main issues, industrialization and urbanization. The society was industrialized, right? The factories were there. Not only children but even adults were working, like, it was extremely low wages, right? They were not paid much. So you want to say something, Reverend? Okay, right. Because you are wearing the mask, it is difficult to read. Okay, if you want, you can remove the mask. And then, yeah. So I was telling you about this, yes, industrialization. And then urbanization. It was like people were rejecting villages, right? They were all coming to the cities and settling there. So then what happens when all the people come and settle? Yes, very good, Reverend. They become crowded, immensely crowded, right? So that means not a very good living condition, right? Yeah. So that happened. So romantic poets were writing all these lyrical ballads, poems, and even their novels about nature. So I have given different, categories like birds. There are several poems about birds, even odes. Let's say ode to a nightingale, right? This lyrical ballad written to the nightingale. And this is kind of very contrasting, reverence, because up to now there was this period where people would go hunting and kill birds, right? Now they were writing poems to birds. A huge contrast. and and this was like intentional in a way, right? So they literally wanted to stop all this hunting, right? The cruelty of human beings. They wanted to go back to something beautiful, almost like a utopian state. Can you remember we discussed about utopia? I don't know whether that was with you. Utopia, this idealized state, right? That means an ideal world, a very beautiful world where there is justice, right? So even now we have this, this love or this orientation towards utopia. That's why Andhra Kumar became the president, right? Because people wanted that utopia. The corruption was there. People wanted to stop it. So it is in all the fields. Can be politics, can be economy, the society, right? Everything. Love, right? Always kind of this idealized state. It is like the perfect state, right? So people, utopia. Let me write it. Yeah. Utopia. So it is like this perfect idealized state, utopia. Have you read Gulliver's Travels, Reverence? Yeah, right? So can you remember this state of horses at the end? The last state, the last kingdom of horses. So that is like utopia. So that is perfect, right? Yeah. And people know that it is not possible to kind of achieve utopia, but still they yearn to have this, right? So this was kind of utopian because they wanted to kind of, create this beautiful world.
It's like Utturukuru.
Yes, Reverend, exactly, yes, it is like that. So maybe you can write a research paper comparing Utturukuru Divayina and this Gulliver's Travels, the state of horses, how that becomes the idealized state, right? Yeah. And even heaven is something utopian, right? Can be in Buddhism or Christianity. It is like this perfect state, right? Where all these gods reside with beautiful clothes, right? With all the, all the sources, good sources, something like that. You remembered something? You remember the poem?
Yes, metaphysical poem. I think Koi Mistress.
To his coy mistress.
Yes.
Right, yeah.
There is a world where there is no dice.
Yeah, yes, kind of immortal presence, right? Yeah, and also this idealized state. And even in metaphysical poetry, you get how women were idealized. They were literally put on a pedestal and kind of, being worshipped. Again, I would say it is a form of objectification, again, not treated as human beings. Right? Yeah. So something like that. So here, yeah, we were discussing about this hunting idea, right? So people were hunting up to now, but here now they were writing poems, even about bees, right? So bees are, these creatures that we cannot even properly see, that much minute little creatures, but you can see how beautifully they celebrated everything, right? Nature and all, and also flowers and trees. And trees, why do you think they wrote this much about trees? What was happening with industrialization? Yeah, they were cutting down the trees, right, in kind of mass scale. So then this was a direct response. They were writing about trees. So yes, so then kind of a response to deforestation. I don't know whether have you seen, Reverend Susie, that some people kind of go and wrap robes around trees. I don't know whether that happens in your culture, Reverend. So in Sri Lanka, when deforestation happens, people just go there, right, and wrap robes around the trees, right? Yeah, so they kind of literally say that it is like, it is like an ordination. And then people are kind of, they're afraid to cut those trees, right? Afraid, and they kind of respect those trees. So something, in a way, something like that. So these people were writing about trees in kind of a very beautiful manner. And also mountains, meadows, and clouds, because mountains and meadows, in a way, because that people were coming out of villages, they were embracing the city life, and these people wanted to show how beautiful are your surroundings in your villages. So how stupid are you, literally, right? Something like that. And also clouds, in a way, because the sky could not be seen with all this machinery stuff, right? The air was polluted, right? So because of that, they were writing about this beautiful presence of clean clouds, right? I think you remember this poem, I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud. Yeah, I think you have that poem in first year. Yeah, by Wordsworth, right? Yeah. So likewise, they were writing about all these things. In a way, all these things are far fetched. You know the meaning of far fetched, right? Something that you cannot kind of touch, right? It is so distant from you. That word you can use. It is far fetched. So you can use this hyphen in the middle. And then there was this exoticism. Do you know what is exoticism, Reverend? Exotic. It's like referring to these distant regions, right? Mostly Orient. You know the difference between Orient and Occident, right? Orient means, yes, Orient means Eastern, right? Yeah, so as in they were during this Renaissance period, and also when all these, I would say, industrialization, and even before that, right, when colonization happened, right? So they kind of divided the world into two hemispheres, as Orient and Occident.
Orient, Perediger.
Yes, Orient means Perediger and Eastern, and Occident means Western, right? Oxident, Orient and Occident. So that was not something geographical or scientific, Reverend, right? So it was something just based on their advantage, their convenience, because of imperialism, colonization, all these things, right? Yeah. So they romanticized actually this Orient and all these distant regions. It was like a form of romanticizing for them. When you read this text, I don't know whether you have that. There's this text called Orientalism by Edward Said. We don't have that. That is available online. So in that one, you get how all these distant regions were kind of, romanticized, and how problematic that is, right? So that's why there was this trend of all these foreign people, white people, to come and get married to all these local women, right? Black women, they were romanticizing this dark skin, right? It was like very new to them. They were romanticizing that. And also nature, in a way, because all these colonized countries were rich in nature, right, and beauty, and also rich in culture as well. And even our spices was kind of, a form of romanticizing for them, because they don't have all these spices, right? Yeah. So here you can see exoticism and also escapism. So first we will discuss this exoticism. That means they were fascinated with distant lands, right? As I told you, especially Orient, and also ancient cultures. And when we consider all this, European civilization, it is not as old as Oriental civilizations. So that was like, very much of a fantasy, because we have kind of a huge history. So they were kind of, romanticized by that. And then exotic settings as well, because these settings were like very beautiful, full of nature, right? Yeah, all these things. And also art often depicted dreams of far off, that means far-fetched, right? Idealized, what we discussed, utopia, as a form of escape from modern society, because modern society was not beautiful at all, right? As I told you, now good living conditions, right? Very difficult, grueling, right? Unpleasant, risky, right? So it was like an escapism. When we even discuss about all this, even now we feel it is like, kind of a mode of escapism, right? Different to what we have right now. So that was there. Okay. and then we will move to the next part. And meanwhile, if you have any questions, let me know, reference. Okay. So the supernatural and the Gothic, right? So supernatural and Gothic we discuss. It's like, forces beyond scientific understanding, right? Yeah. So supernatural we cannot kind of, identify them via science, right? Yeah. And also it is like, it is beyond comprehension, beyond human existence, almost kind of unearthly. Unearthly means, not belonging to the earth, something like that. So there was this interest in the mysterious and also the unknown, the space which we cannot touch, right? So it's kind of, mystical. And also macabre. Macabre means disturbing, causing kind of deadly fear, almost causing death, disturbing and close to death. That some people, they love to kind of experience that, right? Experience all these ghosts. And also some people kind of, that some bikers, they have all this high speed, right? They're always accelerating, speeding up. I think they kind of get a pleasure by kind of being near to death, right? Something very stupid, but that you can understand this idea, macabre, right? Yeah. And also Gothic literature and architecture became popular because, all these Gothic elements are there in which period? Can you remember? We discussed last semester in medieval period, middle age, Gothic architecture, right? Yeah, with all these round shapes on top of the buildings, right? Gothic architecture. Let me send an image to your group. So during the Renaissance, they were rejected. This Gothic was seen as dark and ugly. But then there was this Gothic revival we discussed last Friday. So it is not like very pleasant, very complicated. But they kind of, there was this revival. Yes, Gothic revival was there. Yes. And yeah, so and terror was celebrated. And decay, decay, right? Kind of rotting or decomposing, right? Even in Buddhism you get decay, this jati jara, the second one jara, right? Decaying, yeah, decomposing, yeah. And also the supernatural. So they were interested in this infiniteness. You know what is meant by infinite, right? Limitless, endless. Very good, yes, endless. Something not finite. And also divine, right? So they began to include all this occult. Occult means magical. And also supernatural elements. And it is like, that being terrified is considered something amusing, right? Something like that. They were exploring all these ghosts, even deep down. Like, even personally, I like to kind of, get some sort of an ghostly experience. As in, I haven't kind of experienced that yet, right? So because of that, I would like to kind of, come across a ghost. So something like that, because we haven't experienced that. Have you experienced such a thing? Not yet. Okay, right? So in a way that kind of, even though we believe or not with such, mysterious, yeah, you,
some people don't believe that there is ghosts.
Yeah.
But they have fear.
They have the fear, yes, exactly. Yeah, so they are afraid, but they don't believe, right? So some people would believe if they come across a ghost, right? Something like that. So yeah, we do not know whether they exist or not, right? So sometimes there are, that even Buddhism acknowledges such powers, right? And now there are kind of, I think, some scientific evidence as well for the existence of all these mystical powers, even like the existence of God, right? Something mystical beyond our understanding.
Most of them are saying they are hallucination.
Yeah.
Hallucination like that.
Psychologically, they think those are hallucinations. Yes, right? But again, I have seen some scientific evidence, right? Not much, right? To kind of believe, right? Or to kind of prove that there are all these mystical, right, existence as well, right? So until we come across those, we do not know. Okay, give me a minute, Reverence. Okay. So yeah, we were discussing about all these ghosts, right? And Edgar Allan Poe is one of the most common writers who wrote about all these supernatural stuff, and those are very readable. When there are all this ghostly stuff. Yes. And then we have this idealization of women, something that we discussed as well, right? So in this romantic era, women were seen as innocent and pure creatures, right? Admired and respected. Again, why do you think that idea was there? Yeah. In a way, because that women were not respected. Because during this period, women were also used as laborers, right? They had to work in very grueling conditions, very risky conditions. So then here there was this idea that no, that women should not do such works, right? So they are very innocent, very pure, right? And it's like, kind of the times before Shakespeare, right? The period that you referred to, metaphysical poetry, the time when To His Coy Mistress and all these poems were written, right, by John Donne and all these people. But Shakespeare was kind of against those, right? Shakespeare writes about how this lady is kind of more human-like. Have you read that sonnet? There's this sonnet that Shakespeare says that my lady is not like someone, as in she's not an angel, right? She's a human being, right? When she walks, she doesn't walk like a goddess. She's like a human being, something like that, right? This is the sonnet. Okay, right. So then it is something like that. So Shakespeare was kind of against those. So if you have read this Twelfth Night, right? You didn't have Twelfth Night, right? So there's this drama. So there's this girl who acts like a boy. There's this gender bender drama, right? So there's this movie as well. So it's like that. So he was against this gender concept, but during metaphysical period there was that idealization, and now it was coming back because women were working as laborers, primarily because of that, because these poets wanted to change that sad condition, right? Yeah. And they centered their narratives around celebrating the purity and beauty of a woman, right? But again, it is in a way problematic because they were not treated as human beings again, right? Another kind of, another end. It was not kind of a very balanced perspective, I would say, right? Yeah. because not treated as human beings, kind of objectified in a way. Because when someone is considered like, because when a woman is valued only for her beauty, right? So her brains or her intellectuality, all these are disregarded, and even individuality is disregarded, right? Yeah, kind of treating as dolls, something like that. So that happened during this period. But again, on the other hand, reverends, women also had this freedom to write. When we consider Mary Shelley, she wrote not because she was Shelley's wife, because she was capable. Right? Even when she met Shelley, she was writing. So something like that. So they had that potential. Women also could write. And also it happened towards the end of the period. Primarily because when we consider someone like Emily Bronte, Jane Austen, right, even during the Victorian periods, some of them earlier had to write under nicknames, with male names, right, under male names, with and under male names. Why? Because there was no much of an acknowledging, but what happened towards the end of the Romantic period, they could write in their own names, because they have already gained that individuality. So that means Romantic, movement was successful. That is the idea there, right? Yeah. So here you have that. So they typically saw women as objects for male admiration. There is this idea also in literature, even in post-colonialism, we discuss this related to gender as well, male gaze, right? Right, gaze means you are looking at something, right? So women were identified as objects of male gaze, right? So they are just sitting there, right, in kind of pretty clothing for men to look at, something like that, not treated as individuals. Yeah. So here you can say female writers such as Jane Austen, Mary Shelley, and even the Bronte sisters. So there's this very sad story about Bronte sisters as well. There were all these three sisters: Annie Bronte, Emily Bronte, Charlotte Bronte, and also they had a brother. And as I told you, this medical condition was not very good, so the brother died, right, in a very young age, and all the three sisters, right? So it was not like they did not have much of a very long lasting lifetime. If they had, they would have written more, and you would have a lot to study, a lot more to study, right? Yeah. So that happened. So they had to write under male pseudonyms. Pseudonyms means, kind of these fictional names. Yeah. Mainly male names. And did you have Mill on the Floss, reverence? No, right? Okay, so Mill on the Floss, you may read it when you are free, right? So Mill on the Floss is written by George Eliot, but she was a lady, right? But she wrote under this nickname George Eliot because she couldn't publish as a woman, something like that, right? But those things changed towards the end of the Romantic period. So Mary Shelley, those people could write. And even Mary Shelley's mother wrote something about the rights of women. So it was like, you can see how progressive that was, right? So very modern towards the end of the Romantic period. Yes. And then I think you have these key figures. I don't know whether that is very clear. Is that clear, reference? That image? No. Kind of clear. Let me send you that image if I can find it. Let me send you the colored one. We have it. Yes, I will send you. Yes, I have sent the image now. Yes, now it is sent. Yeah, so here the most prominent or the pioneer or the person who kind of started everything was like Wordsworth, right? So even his name is so beautiful, right? Wordsworth. It's like, he wrote words of worth, worthy words, something like that. So that's how I used to remember when I was a kid. That's how I remembered him, who wrote worthy words. Yes. So, yeah. And also, you don't have to remember the full name, Reverence, right? So, Reverend Nandasri was kind of complaining the names were too long and difficult to remember, right? So, then you can just remember the last name. That's enough, right? Because they are like, the Keats or the Shelley, the Wordsworth, right? They're like so famous, so prominent figures, so no problem. Even when you write the answers, you can just write the last name, no issues. Yes. And then you have Blake, right? Even though he was kind of, born before Wordsworth, Wordsworth was the person who kind of started the movement, right? With lyrical ballads and all. And then you have Blake. Blake also wrote, I told you that songs of innocence and songs of experience. Songs of innocence about the soft side of life, and then experience about this, rough side, as in about industrialization and all these things, and also the kind of the terror and fear, right? All these things. And yeah, and third one would be Coleridge, right? He was a kind of an amazing poet, and also he was the most prominent figure in literary criticism, because this was not only a period about literature but also literary criticism was there, and Coleridge was kind of one of the most prominent ones. And yeah, then we have like our favorite, I think Dr. Varuni's PhD is about John Keats. Yeah, so we have this, immense love towards John Keats. When we meet, we always discuss about Keats, right? So Keats, and then Shelley, right? So Keats is like, they were friends, and also Keats had this relationship with this girl called Fanny Brown, right? But they could not get married because apparently he was so sick and he died. And then there's this nice movie called Bright Star, which is about their love story. That movie is made from that love story, because there were some letters. I think those letters, some of them you can access. All these love letters, they were published later, because Keats was kind of very sad, because he thought that if he kind of made those letters public, then it won't be good for Fanny's future. So he was kind of so good, he was thinking like that. But after his death, I think Fanny published these letters, right? So I think he asked all these letters to be burnt with him, the ones Fanny sent him. But Fanny had those letters which Keats had written. So then she published those. Something like that happened. Yes, Reverend? Yeah.
What is the name of movie?
A movie is Bright Star. I don't know whether that is available online. Earlier I had a copy, but now it is not there. And you can see that towards the end of his life, he was kind of like very much in love with life. So it is very sad to read Keatsian poems, because he wanted to live. You can see that he wanted to live. But then, that with all these conditions, it was not possible. So what actually happened was his brother got tuberculosis, and then he went to look after his elder brother, and that's how he got TB. And then brother recovered, but this one died. Yeah. And then Shelley. So again, as I told you, they were good friends, right? And even Shelley wrote all these beautiful things. And even in Sri Lanka, Reverence, we had this revival of romanticism in a way. So there's this poet called Kudaligama. Maybe Reverend Susita has heard H.M. Kudaligama. There's this Sri Lankan poet, right? Kind of a famous one. So he's called Sri Lankan Shelley, because he wrote about nature and beauty. So, but again, his poems kind of, resonate with Keats' poems, right? Because Keats was kind of very much in love with nature. Most of his poems are about nature, something like that. And then we have George G. Byron. This is Lord Byron, right? So you can remember him as Lord Byron. You don't have to, as in, you can just forget the George part. So they were like the main figures, but there are more. But you can remember these people as the most pioneer figures, right? Yeah. So that's it. And then we have to discuss this poem, but the office was not open. Now I will go to the office and bring all these printouts. So you may take a break, reverends, right? I'll just rush to the office and come, and meanwhile you can take photos of this syllabus. I will give you. Yes, Reverend. I think that one, Reverend. Let me see. Yes, it's that one. I don't know whether it is available though.